their tournament path and ban it in the few maps where it does show up. It looks like we are about ready to get underway here in the Underrot for our first game of the series.
That's right, let's see what's in their wheelhouse as both teams getting into the big polls right now in game one.
Alright, so we see the double DK comp by both teams, but we see a Havoc Demon Hunter for Limit, while One Last Chance is actually playing that Hunter, and Jet already going down on their first pull already.
Oh yeah, not the greatest thing right off the bat to have a death there, but of course you can just release and join back to the group, so it shouldn't be that major of an issue. Of course, he did probably just lose out on the rest of his cooldowns, but, you know, at the end of the day, that Unholy DK is going to be doing most of the damage, so it shouldn't be too major of an issue, just 5 seconds on the board for them. But the big problem with this pull, with this Sanguine dungeon, with Max going down right at the end here, with just a couple ticks alive, it's just going to be Max dying for them, and just 5 seconds back on the board for them. Like I was about to say, the big problem with this dungeon is Sanguine. You're going to have to be kiting these pulls out and make sure you don't get any healing off, and it looks like, so far, Limit's just done a slightly better job of that.
Definitely. It looks like One Last Chance just had a bunch of Sanguine go off on some of their mobs, and then it looked like they accidentally pulled the ticks on this side. I'm not really sure if that was intentional or not, but they did manage to finish it off without having any more issues, so good job on them. As Complexity Limit now is already on Elderly Axa and popping that Bloodlust. Both of the teams saving the Bloodlust for the boss.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's a Tyrannical dungeon, so you want to make sure you have it for this boss. As long as you're able to kite out that Sanguine pull, you shouldn't really need Bloodlust for the first pull. Also, like, having the Bloodlust could potentially make it so that it's harder to deal with Sanguine management. Like, maybe your AoE damage kills the lower health mobs too quickly if you have Bloodlust, so I could see that being another reason as well. But I think it's just, you know, it being a Tyrannical boss, you want to make sure you get through it as quickly as possible, as cleanly as possible. And like you see, that the Bloodlust is out when the boss is at 30%, so they're definitely getting full usage of it here as well.
Yeah, definitely makes sense to save it for the boss here in that scenario. Both of the teams also up to 70% trash, so both of the teams did a very similar pull at the start. So no team advantage on the trash, so Complexity Limit just straight up ahead with Elderly Axa here compared to One Last Chance. Also, the difference in comp, I mean, you have the Demon Hunter, which might do slightly less single target damage compared to a Hunter, but it does amplify the damage from the DKs. It does increase their damage with the magic damage increase that it provides, so it might actually just end up being very equal. And on AoE pulls, getting that extra magic damage really does matter quite a lot for those DKs.
Yep, for sure. And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily, like, too big of a difference. Demon Hunter with Metamorphosis when you have Bloodlust available, I think it's actually pretty similar to Unholy DKs, right? If they have their meta when you have Bloodlust up, they'll do pretty similar single target. Obviously, Hunter with good RNG will do a lot more single target damage, but I think it's just more of a consistency thing, right? They really want to make sure they have the magic damage for these big pulls, like this one we're seeing in Underrot. Half of the room pulled for Complexity Limit, and it's already gone. Just like that, before the Sanguine pulls even have time to just show up on the ground, all of it's dead.
Yeah, I mean, where did the mobs go? They're just all gone in a couple of seconds. And it's impressive to see how well they're timing, I mean, the damage as well, right? Because if you have some of the AoE go out on some of the mobs and they die too early, then it can definitely cause lots of issues with the Sanguine heal going through. Sanguine management will be incredibly important for this dungeon here, because lots of mobs have different kinds of HP pools in Underrot specifically. You have the Living Rot, which is much more HP than most other mobs, and then on top of that, you just have all different kinds of HP pools, which makes Sanguine management a lot harder. You do have the double grip from the DKs and the Ring of Peace, but you definitely want to make sure you use them wisely. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how those teams handle the Sanguine. But Complexity Limit already in that obelisk dealing with the Spirit Breaker here.
Yep, and already down as well, just, you know, blitzing right through it. And I think it finished at like 20-30 seconds. It was pretty quick. And now, of course, they're going to be moving on to likely pulling the rest of the trash available, probably in addition to one skeleton pack, pulling it on top of Kragmaw and letting the Unholy DKs do their thing again. The big thing to mention here, again, is that Sanguine Affix. If they're not careful about their mob management, they could end up healing the boss. Potentially not pulling Kragmaw here, or maybe just waiting until everything's stacked. But I think on top of that, pulling the trash on top of the boss just leaves way too much potential for Sanguine healing to go off. So I'm not surprised to see them actually not pulling on top of the boss here. Oh, never mind. Spoke too soon. Pulling it off when everything's dead. But Fired Up goes down right on the pull. And it looks like it was right after his cooldowns are popped too, so they're only going to have the damage of one of the Unholy DKs here for this AoE. That should be enough to deal with most of the trash, and it is. Everything melts instantly, but they're just going to lose a lot of the single target damage from having that second Unholy DK on the pull. I mean, that's all of his Festermite stacks, all of his cooldowns popped. He's not going to have that available for the single target here, so unfortunate timing on that death there for Fired Up.
Yeah, but the fortunate timing on the charge by Kragma as he charged out of the Sanguine pulse as soon as they died. So well timed there by the boss and by Complexity Limit on their side. So well done, not getting any of that heal on the boss. Don't want to see any of that happen. Now they're out of battle rests, so they definitely want to make sure nothing like that happens anymore. And you see Max also just dragging the boss away from the Sanguine pools, making sure that he doesn't run into the Sanguine. But Eric going down, this means they have to either reset the boss or play
Going down during the
65%.
tantrum.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. He died to the last tick of the tantrum there. They don't have the battle res, like I said, because they just used it on Fired Up. With the boss already at 60%, I wouldn't be surprised to see them try to finish off the boss here, even with the DPS down. They still do have a little bit of a lead. They'll probably end up killing this boss after One Last Chance, but you have to remember, they've already dealt with that obelisk in the corner, whereas One Last Chance haven't. Did Kragma just go over that Sanguine pool during the charge? I didn't quite see it.
I don't think
He must
so,
have
but
not.
it looks like they're resetting
so.
anyway.
They're resetting anyways. Yeah, probably. Ooh, the charge is unfortunate there. That's unfortunate timing.
It's also Twisted
reset's
is
gonna
pretty
take
low on
longer.
mana as well, so maybe they were just thinking rather reset now, even if it might be slightly
Yeah.
slower. But if they end up wiping at the end because Twisted is completely that will cost them a lot of time. So they just decided to have a reset here, resting up Atrocity and Eric. But yeah, this is a big time loss for them, having that death there without the battle rest available. One last chance on the other hand. As Sarah mentioned, they still have to do the obelisk, so this might not mean too much. Complexity Limit can still catch up here, but definitely want to play clean now without that safety of a battle rest. One last chance, by the way, also no battle rest available anymore on their side.
Yeah, I mean, Limit even got, unfortunately, like the Quaking affix increased the timer here as well. It was Twisted got his first Reawaken cast canceled by that Quaking, so they had to wait another 8 or so seconds for that cast to go off. So just even more time lost for them here. And remember, this is a Tyrannical boss. This is a lot of HP to chew through, and a lot of the reason these teams are able to do these bosses so quickly is because they're able to abuse the Unholy DK Festermite trade on where they turn this AoE bursting swords popping into single target damage, and then they also have a massive strength bonus afterwards with their Army of the Dead. When those cooldowns are down, Unholy DK kind of struggles to actually do pretty significant single target damage. So, and not having that Hunter for the consistent single target damage in favor of the Demon Hunter means that the actual single target potential damage coming out of Complexity Limit versus One Last Chance here is going to be significantly lower. Going to probably end up being pretty even after that wipe with One Last Chance. Of course, they still do have the obelisk that they have to do, taking that into account. So unfortunate that death occurred, but the fact that they were able to make the call to reset it and come back and still be like sort of even in the dungeon at this point is good for them.
Yeah, for sure. We see One Last Chance, on the other hand, did get their, I believe it should be their last tantrum. Raiden is also pretty as well, so they want to make sure... Oh, they got a charge as well, so this is very good. This boss has an RNG casting sequence in between tantrums. If he casts the charge first, instead of the indigestion, which is the frontal, then he will actually do charge, frontal, charge, which takes a little bit longer between tantrums compared to when he casts the indigestion first, then he will just do frontal, charge, tantrum, which means you have less time in between tantrums. So getting a charge first, definitely favorable here for One Last Chance as they finish off the boss. And now they deal with that obelisk that Complexity Limit already finished off. So looks like if Complexity Limit finishes off this boss before One Last Chance finishes off their obelisk, they're actually still ahead on their side.
Yeah, just barely. But the thing to take into account is the extra 10 seconds from death timers, right? They're going to have that as well. So we'll actually end up seeing here, Kragma's going to go down for Complexity Limit while One Last Chance is still dealing with Aircraft Breaker of Heroes. Complexity Limit is going to go ahead and do that trash pull that we're kind of seeing One Last Chance prepare themselves for by already moving Breaker of Heroes into this area. They're probably going to do the trash pull right afterwards. So yeah. Complexity Limit is still slightly in the lead, even though they had that one boss reset. But when you're the second-rate team looking to try to move up the rankings into the second seed for global finals, having this kind of hiccup in your first game of the day isn't kind of the greatest start, right?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to see any of that happening anymore for them further into the dungeon, as they do a pretty big pull on their side again. They're pulling the Skeleton Pack on top of the Defilers and Sancha here, so you want to keep an eye out on those interrupts on the Defilers. Definitely very dangerous if the casts go through. They have a Shadow Bolt Volley, which does a huge amount of AoE damage. And then on top of that, you also have the Withering Curse, which decreases your HP, I believe, or damage taken, and it also decreases your damage done. So definitely don't want to have any of that going through. But it looks like they're doing a good job interrupting everything. Actually, one of the Wicked Frenzies went through. You see the debuff on Max that it applies when one of the Guardians has the Frenzy cast, but did manage to dispel it now, so they should be safe for the rest of this fight. One last chance, just dealing with the stretch a little bit slower on their side, also got the Withering Curse going through, but they're now fighting Sencha as well.
Yeah, and you can see as well, like the comparisons that we're talking about now, even with that reset limit now about 30% ahead on Sporecaller Zancha, with only a 1% difference in trash, which isn't going to be a major difference over the rest of the dungeon. They'll probably end up doing the same trash pull into those final 2 Corruptors before the Unbound Abomination at the end of the dungeon. So yeah, still slightly an advantage for complexity limit, but they do have to stay clean because One Last Chance is right on their heels.
Yeah, definitely. Both teams do have their battle rest back up now, so in case something does go wrong for them, they have that safety net of a battle rest. And because of the comp they're running with the double DK, they can also get the person up pretty fast as well without having to use that engineering rest. One last chance, they're 82%, yeah, 1% ahead, which again is not a huge deal at all because that definitely doesn't mean they have to do another pull. As long as both of the teams have the same amount of trash pulls after Sencha, it's going to be very similar for them. So let's see what kind of trash they do pull afterwards. Both of the teams do have Bloodlust available now, but very, very likely they are going to save it for the last boss because they still have to deal with 3 Awakened mobs on the last boss in a Tyrannical environment.
Yep, for sure. It's difficult, but Atrocity now going down for complexity limit, and Eric as well. They only have 1 battle res available. It's going to go out on Atrocity with Sporecaller Zancha at 25%. That could be the edge that One Last Chance needs to get back into this boss. With 1 extra DPS for the final 40% of the boss, they should be able to at least make up some of the gap here, in addition to those extra 10 seconds of death timers on the board. This is like, you know, not a clean Underrot at all for complexity limit here. One Last Chance is kind of outperforming what we've been expecting from them based off of the previous cups.
Yeah, definitely not what we expect to see from Limit, and surprising performance by One Last Chance so far. Do they have Revival ready? This might be a full team wipe, actually. They do not have Revival ready, but we saw the Netherwalk come up at Atrocity. Let's hope they can finish it off here. Otherwise, it's going to be a full team wipe on 1% on Sancha. They're just kiting it around. But it's a Tyrannical fight, and it looks like it can. There we go. Okay, so they need to reset. Okay. They need to release. This is going to cost them a lot of time. They have to release. They have to run back, and again, that's another 15 seconds of death timers on the board. I mean, this is about as not clean a boss kill as it can possibly be. That's very unfortunate as well. But again, able to kite out that last 2% is pretty important for them. Getting the boss kill, giving themselves that sort of checkpoint. They can go through this shortcut on the left here that you'll see them take in just a second. That will let them get back in the dungeon more quickly here. But I believe with those extra death timers on the board and the fact that they have to run back, that One Last Chance is now going to take the lead. But the thing with One Last Chance that I'm concerned about is the fact that on every single Tyrannical boss so far, they've had the potential to catch up and give themselves a lead with 1 or 2 DPS players down on complexity limit, and they really haven't taken advantage of that. You'd think in a situation like this where one team has had players dead for almost every single, or 2 of the 3 bosses, that you would have a more significant lead, but they really haven't taken that. I don't know. I feel like they should be more ahead than they are right now. I mean, Complexity Limit definitely did the bigger pulls, right? They're the number 2 seed versus number 7. I think Complexity Limit is definitely the team here that should be winning this. Theoretically, they also have the better strategies, the faster strats. I'm fired up going down here on their pull as well. They do not have a battle rest, so I'm fired up actually releasing here. This means they have to finish off this pull without their second DK, which is a huge time loss again. One Last Chance, on the other hand, they did play slower, right? They did pull the Guardian pack by itself, and now they're moving to the next 2 mobs that they have to kill to open up the last gate. But Eric going down too, just so many issues for Complexity Limit here.
And I'm sure Tyrannical will talk about this after the cast, but it makes total sense that this is an incredibly dangerous pull. And I wonder if this is normally their main route, right? Because this triple Corruptor pull is one of the most dangerous pulls in the game for any melee player. I mean, anyone who's played melee in this dungeon can attest to that. Those Corruptors, having to dodge those tentacles on the ground and all the frontals from the Corruptors is probably one of the scariest things you have to do. Like flashbacks to Maw of Souls inside the boat, having to dodge all of those abilities. It's not fun at all. And both DKs going down here for Complexity Limit is unfortunate. One last chance, though. It looks like they're going to be finishing off their Corruptor pull at roughly the same time as Complexity Limit here. As long as those DKs get back, we're going to see these teams both pull the final boss at roughly the same time. So really the thing to look at is that extra 40 seconds on the board that One Last Chance has over Complexity Limit here. Are they going to be able to take advantage of that and take this first dungeon?
Yeah, and we saw June go down as well here on that pull. That means they're out of battle resistance on One Last Chance side as well. Very impressive by Complexity Limit, to be honest, to actually be able to get to the last boss quicker compared to One Last Chance, even with all of those mistakes that they did. So you really see that this strategy that Complexity Limit is doing is quite a bit faster compared to One Last Chance. But it's also a lot riskier, and this is why we see all of those deaths come in. And this is why One Last Chance is a very good chance of winning this dungeon because of those death differences. But now we'll have to see if those teams can actually deal with the 3 Awakened mobs and the boss at the same time. It is a Tyrannical boss. So Quaking, on top of having to deal with all of those Awakened mobs, can cause lots of issues, and none of the teams actually have a battle rest available to them either.
Yep, for sure. And of course, the meter to look at, of course, is that blood meter underneath the Unbound Abomination's health pool. Every single time that fills up, he'll spawn 2 blood visages, which, when killed, will both do a combined 1/3 of the boss's HP. So fill up 3 of those blood phases, deal with the boss's HP, and that's how you finish this guy off. And you can see Complexity Limit just superior damage right now, already entering that first blood visage phase, whereas One Last Chance still has about 25% more to go on their first phase. It's going to be really, really difficult to pull out 40 seconds of single target damage for Complexity Limit here, so this could end up being incredibly close at the end.
Yeah, if neither of the teams make a mistake and have no death, this will be incredibly close with the extra damage that you mentioned that Complexity Limit has on the boss. They just on the other bosses as well, they just had superior single target damage. So we'll see. Keep an eye on that energy bar on the bottom to see how fast they can deal with those, how fast they can spawn the blood visages and actually remove the HP from the Unbound Abomination. Both of them did deal with the Awakened mobs now, so it's only going to be the boss from now on and how much single target damage they can do.
The gap is widening, though, as Complexity Limit has now finished off their second Blood Visage set, whereas One Last Chance is only 40% of the way through their second one. So this could end up being kind of close here. Keep a mental timer. We're at 17:07 whenever Limit spawns. Let's see what the timer is at whenever One Last Chance finishes their second pull off. It looks like it's going to be about 20 to 25 seconds behind, so this could end up being ridiculously close at the end here.
Yeah, we see them now very close to proccing those last Blood Visages already on Complexity Limit. It looked like they had some cooldowns available there at the very end, and they just pumping the single target damage so much. And look how much damage Max is doing on his warrior as well. He's doing 115k DPS on his prod warrior, and they're already about to finish off those last blood visages. There we go. The last one is being gripped. They are finishing it off. So now 40 seconds on the clock for One Last Chance to finish off the boss.
There it is. 40 seconds on the board for One Last Chance to do single target damage to the Unbound Abomination. Of course, there is time after the blood gauge fills up. Those 2 visages will have to be killed by Titan Keeper Hezrol as well. That light beam does a lot of damage to them. We're down to now 20 seconds on the board, and they still haven't spawned. The blood visage is going to be neck and neck here at the end. It's going to come down to whether or not they're able to completely finish off those blood visages now. 10 seconds on the board with the blood visages just now spawning. This is going to be ridiculously close.
It's so close. It looks like they haven't gripped it in yet. The blood visages are spawning, but they only have 1 second left. They're not going to make it.
How?
It's Complexity Limit winning their first game with 11 deaths on the board. Wow.
Complexity Limit pulling. I'd say they got very, very fortunate onto that one. One Last Chance made a couple of mistakes. They were making mistakes with Sanguine for a number of times, and Complexity Limit's able to pull through, but that was, 1, not what we expect, and 2, I guess that's the continuing fashion of Complexity Limit kind of failing in style, or failing in catastrophic ways, Dratnos.
Yeah, I mean, we see these two sides of Complexity Limit. Sometimes they have these massive, awesome pulls that work out great. Sometimes they do just way more damage than everybody else. And then sometimes they just, like, chain die to weird things or have bosses just go wrong for them a lot more often. But it's rare that we see those two sides of complexity limit in the same map. And that's what we saw here in the Underrot, where we saw them managing to win despite having multiple horrific catastrophes because of that, great extra way that they pulled bigger, faster, and did more damage.
Yeah, and when we look at, One Last Chance as well, I mean, they kind of had just errors abound here is ironic, where just small positioning errors cause big Sanguine healing and extra deaths, just eating up so much time that should have been their dungeon.
They were given just about every single possibility you can be given to win a dungeon, right? They were given so much of an opportunity to just take that kind of free win from complexity limit there, and they just weren't able to come up with a single target damage in order to pull it off. It almost looked like a limit 1 based off of Twilight Dev procs there. Max did 110k DPS on that final boss, and Sharis did 68k. That's a pretty ridiculous damage differential.
It's normal for the Demon Hunter to get out DPS by the Prot Warrior. That's been happening for me a lot recently.
No, it's not.
Oh,
No, it's
you
not.
hate to see it. Drados, let's go over the highs and lows. A lot of the lows throughout this dungeon.
All right, so this one actually started off with a mistake for One Last Chance that ended up costing them the dungeon if you look at the timer. A death on the very first pull that led to them taking a really long time from one of their DKs because they didn't have that big damage. Complexity Limit, meanwhile, their big pulls almost all looked pretty great, especially, going into Cragmaw's room, they just executed that trash beautifully. And then they started having these just random deaths. They consumed a battle res to a nothing death, a death for a weird reason. I'm Fired Up just went down kind of inexplicably. And then when Eric went down in the middle of a boss fight, they didn't have a battle res available for him. And that led to them having to reset Cragmaw because they were down in DPS and the boss was at 70% health on Tyrannical. Into the third boss, they had another flash of brilliance. They saved their Death Knight burst for later in the fight. They didn't use it on pull, they used it to execute all the mobs at once, and that really did a good job of managing Sanguine, and it let them pull a massive pull onto the third boss very safely with an affix that otherwise might prevent that. But then 4 of them managed to die on that boss fight, and Atrocity had to solo the last 1% by himself. So, from Complexity Limit, it's just these two sides of, a first seed team and an 8 seed team coexisting in Complexity Limit. And we'll have to see which of them ends up winning out as the tournament continues.
Yeah, I mean, Junkyard's coming up next on this one, Nagura, and no dungeon, I think, throughout this season has had greater opportunity for scuffing, for just completely destroying people's hopes and dreams than Junkyard.
Definitely. I mean, this was a time trial dungeon, and the difference in time between those two teams is actually pretty significant. It's 6-minute difference between them. One Last Chance only getting the number 9 seed in Junkyard, while Complexity Limit has the number 3 seed with 14 minutes approximately. So a huge difference in time there. But again, we've talked about the lower seeded teams actually putting a lot of time into the time trial maps, because in the lower seeded map pools, the time trial dungeons are going to be a lot there. So that's why we see lower seeded teams just put a lot of time into that. That means One Last Chance definitely could have improved their strategy for Junkyard from the time trials to now. And maybe Complexity Limit, sometimes you see teams having really risky strategies for time trials because you have 5 tries for the time trial. So even if you don't manage to do it 2 or 3 times, if you do it the 4th time or the 5th time, you're still going to be fine. So lots of risky strategies for time trial dungeons, which means there's lots of room for mistakes when you do those risky strats. So, and we've already seen them struggle quite a bit in Underrot. I think there's definitely a chance for One Last Chance to win one of those games now.
Yeah, and at this point, I think the biggest issue that we have to look at as well, Dranos, is the fact that One Last Chance just had too many of their own errors. Some of them didn't even result in extra deaths, right? But it got to the point where they weren't staying close enough to their opponents to capitalize on their mistakes because they were making too many of their own.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't describe it as a mistake-filled run. They had a couple of big... I guess they had one big mistake and then a couple of, Sanguine inefficiencies. I think that the Sanguine inefficiencies kind of just fall into, that's part of the reason that their pathing is slower, is because they do the Sanguine less well in Underrot. In Junkyard, yeah, I mean, making up 6 minutes, a 6-minute difference between times is going to require complexity limit to somehow have more go wrong for them in this dungeon than did in the Underrot. Now, we've seen that before in Junkyard. It has happened, but I wouldn't be counting on it if I was one last chance. I think complexity limit's going to win it here, and 2-0 one last chance.
Yeah, and I'd say it's also not the first time that we've had complexity limit Zyro start off their cup play with some rough runs, with some like Dranos ended up saying, some 7th, 8th seed like looking appearance first, and then they pull out the later half of the dungeon, the next series, the next game, they start playing like the first seed, the 2nd seed, something along those lines. So I think that's also what I'd be looking for too.
Yeah, we want to see the full top end here, and I think we're really giving them the best chance to do that in a time trial dungeon, which is something they would have practiced a lot, right? They have a good solid time, clearly not as good as Method and A's, which was pretty ridiculous to see, but it's definitely up there. A minute off that pace definitely isn't something to just put down right away. So I'm really interested to see if we can see yet another clean 0-death Junkyard run, but based off of the fact that we've only seen one this entire season, I think that's going to be a pretty difficult task for either of these teams to pull off. I
think for pretty much everyone, it's always going to be a tough issue to go for, and part of it's because it seems like people are always trying to dodge this dungeon, and now at this point in Nagura, they can't dodge it any longer.
I mean, you could theoretically, but that would be a very wasted ban. To banning out a time trial dungeon,
yeah.
Usually, I mean, especially if you're the higher seeded team, right? If you're the lower seeded team and you ban out a time trial dungeon because there's no way that you can beat their strat, like, for example, when we saw Method EU have this, like, sub 10-minute Ataldazar, we've seen teams ban their Atal against them, which would make sense, but you can't really ban the time trial if you're the higher seeded team, right? So definitely not something you want to do here, and definitely want to make sure you did practice that one.
That's right, and game is underway with complexity limit up 1 against one last chance in Junkyard.
All right, so we already see a little bit of a comp change here for one last chance. They have been playing Demon Hunter, DK plus Hunter in the time trials, and now they replaced their Demon Hunter with a 2nd DK.
Oh. Yeah, actually, that makes. Did they? No, they ran double DK in the Underrot as well, right?
No, from time trials they switched it up.
Oh, from time trials. My brain is in different places, but apparently so is Fired Up. Is he goes down on this first pull? Unfortunately, with everyone dropping low and Max also going down, they don't have the battle res available, and this is gonna be unfortunate for Complexity Limit here. As another team wipe here on this very first pull. There must be. I wonder if they're having some issues, maybe if someone's like, because this is not what we're expecting from this team, right?
Definitely not. I mean, it is a very volatile pull because you have these bullies, and there's just so much going on here in Melee that lots of teams have told me that in Junkyard it's a little bit of an RNG pull here because of the shockwave from the bullies. Now, it's just, I mean, you can dodge the shockwave, right? But it's really hard to see where they're facing when you pull so many mobs on top of each other. So you have all of these animations going on in Melee, you have all of these mobs, and then you need to see where the shockwave is facing. It's incredibly hard, and it does one-shot you. So that might have just been what happened here, and they didn't manage to recover. One Last Chance also had a death, actually. Raiden went down on that first pull. I believe it also was a shockwave on their side as well. But they did manage to get him back up with the battle rest, I believe. No, they didn't even use a battle rest. So they did manage to somehow recover from the death, which means that they are definitely in the lead now because they did manage to finish off that pull, 15% trash, and they're now dealing with the Tank Buster while Complexity Limit has to do everything one by one now because they don't have the cooldowns available anymore to do that big pull again.
Yeah, the thing to mention is that they didn't blow their bloodlust on that first pull. They're probably saving it for the boss, like we assumed for ramping earlier today. That's an interesting choice, and it's probably the difference between their time trial run and Method and A's rather, where they bloodlust on the very first pull just so they could instantly have it up for the final boss pull. But yeah. The thing we really need to keep an eye on here is One Last Chance, right? We need to see how they plan on pulling this dungeon to see why their time trial time was 6 minutes slower. Was it 6 minutes slower because their actual routing and trash pulls were 6 minutes slower, or was it 6 minutes slower because they were unable to put together a semblance of a clean run in time trials? If it's the former, then Complexity Limit should absolutely come back, play clean, and take this win. But if it's the latter, this could end up being, again, a very close series. Now both teams on King Gobblemak and Bloodlust, like we thought, popped for this boss pool with the trash here.
Yeah, and again, they might have just increased. Maybe they have a better strategy now compared to the time trials too. That's also a possibility, right? Because they did change their lineup, so that definitely indicates that they changed up something between time trials and tournament. So we'll see what they do later on. But yeah, for now we have to see how they deal with King Gobblemak here. We saw One Last Chance actually drop incredibly low on one of the AoE casts here, the Rumble. As you can see, Rhydon dropping really low. Oh my god, he is going down here. They do have a Battle Rest available, so they'll get him up immediately. But yeah, there's just so much damage going on here on that Tyrannical fight. Especially because you also have to... So how the way that MDI teams are playing this boss, they don't want to pull the 2 bullies that you can see in the back here. And if you don't want to pull those bullies, you can also not use the charge stations here that are in the back. That means that if you soak the charge smash by the boss, some of the players cannot get rid of the debuff. The debuff takes for quite a lot of damage. You can see it on Sharas right now, then Max and Eric and Atrocity as well. So this is a lot of damage on top of also having to heal the Rumble.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the pull strategy is going to be afterwards, right? Because yeah, King Gobblemak, once you've dealt with the trash pull, it's just pretty much a single target encounter. Make sure you deal with the charge smash, put it on whatever pull you're staying close to. Of course, most teams opt to use this one puller that is tacked on right now, and then maybe put one of those charge smash debuffs on the bot so it can run around the room. But I'm curious to see what One Last Chance strategy here is, because it's very likely that what we're going to see from Complexity Limit is similar to what Method and A pulled off with their Trixie and Nano area plus the Gunker area. If One Last Chance ends up pulling smaller here, that's going to be the major difference. But they're gearing up for this major pull here. They're in the corner. They're going to be line of sighting Trixie and Nano here. They're going to be pulling all of the available trash in that courtyard, and it's going to be all eyes on the Unholy DK damage here. Are they going to be able to pull this off without having anyone go down? Yeah,
so they don't have the Bloodlust available here. We saw Ramping actually save the Bloodlust for this very pull just because they thought it's so dangerous to deal with. So they saved the Bloodlust all the way until this point. But One Last Chance did not do that. They used the Bloodlust for the first boss. Now we'll see how they deal with it. We saw Taste actually go through here by Trixie, so that does quite a bit of damage. We're going to have to keep an eye on the debuffs as Rhydon has to heal all of that damage away. And I think Complexity Limit just was a little bit slower here after Gobblemak, because it looked like they had to gather some of the shock bots or other bots on the way, because they lost quite a few of them at the very first pull, I believe.
Yep, let's keep an eye on it here. Most of the trash already dead for One Last Chance. Actually, all the trash dead. You're just onto the boss now, but they really didn't take full advantage of the Unholy DK damage here, right? The bosses aren't really as low as we would normally see them for both teams. Usually by the time all the trash is dead, the bosses are, sub 50%. Both bosses are sub 50%. Let's see if Complexity Limit is able to do a better job of actually cleaving both bosses down here. Of course, all trash is now pulled inside. We see Twisted actually almost going down there, but able to keep himself alive. This is a very dangerous pull. A lot of this trash does a lot of AoE damage, and you can see both bosses now below 70%, and those Unholy DKs are going to be able to use that advantage of that Festermite buff as well as their cooldowns to burn the boss down. And I think that was a pretty significantly better job of cleaving the bosses down from Complexity Limit versus what we saw from One Last Chance.
Yeah, definitely. It looked like One Last Chance did not get Trixie into the pool at the start. It looked like she was just standing outside casting, didn't get interrupted properly, and therefore she just didn't stack up with the rest of the trash and the boss. So this is why they had to finish it off now. Cost them a couple of seconds for sure, but there's still an lead here on top of also having the 20 seconds timer in their favor because of the extra deaths that Limit has here. Now we'll see what kind of pulls they do. They probably are gearing up to go to this ganker area where big pulls can be very dangerous. We do have the Mistweavers on both sides, so you do have the revival to get rid of the diseases from the consume, but we'll see how they abuse that healing ability by the Mistweavers, as Complexity Limit is now downing the boss as well.
Yep. And I think the major issue for them there was they were a lot slower in getting to Trixie and Nano's room. They lost about 20 seconds there, as you could see in the split timers, just because they had to deal with I think it was a couple of the fixate mobs beforehand. They pulled 3 of those as well. So even though they were able to deal with that boss in a little bit more clean fashion, Complexity Limit did end up dealing with the boss slower than what we saw from One Last Chance. As we see One Last Chance already on to some of that Gunker trash here.
Yeah, one thing to note as well is that One Last Chance did deal with one of the Awaken mobs already, while Complexity Limit has not yet. We've seen Method and A earlier deal with 3 obelisks on the last boss. They dealt with, I believe it was Samrak, that they dealt with at the very end of the dungeon. We'll see if Complexity Limit does something similar. If One Last Chance deals with multiple obelisks and not just the tank buster in the start, that will definitely also be in Complexity Limit's favor if they manage to deal with 3 or maybe even 4 obelisks on the last boss. As Settles mentioned, it's a very easy thing to do earlier, so we'll have to see if they actually pull it off.
And we were seeing this strategy kind of come out from the European teams in this dungeon last weekend, where sometimes they'll pull double Toxic Monstrosities, have people run into it just to make sure they get that debuff so nobody else has to worry about it, and then the Mistweaver Monk can then revival off that healing taken debuff that the players get from walking into the consume. Just a little strategy to deal with that mechanic over, the typical strategy of just running out of the consume makes it a little bit easier. And we're seeing it just now from Complexity Limit, the double Toxic Monstrosity pulled. People are just going to walk in. Here comes the revival.
Ooh.
The revival didn't come out.
Yeah, it was too early.
Did he get stunned by a suffocating smog, or was it too early? That was unfortunate for them, but they are going to be able to live through it, albeit not quite as clean as you would expect from them as well. One Last Chance, just now going for the double Toxic Monstrosity pull. Hopefully we see the same thing out of them. Doesn't look like they quite did it. Still on the hunter there. Okay, a little bit better job from One Last Chance there of dealing with that debuff, but the trash is living quite a bit longer. One of those Toxic Monstrosities still at 50% for them.
So it looked like Twisted did revival the first one, and then he just out-healed the second absorb debuff on the whole group, which is incredible. He did 200k HPS almost, I assume with Way of the Crane, just pumping the huge AoE HPS numbers, making sure he gets rid of that debuff by just out-healing it instead of dispelling it. So, well done. Looks like One Last Chance did the same thing, just the other way around. They out-healed the first one and then used Revival for the second one. So, I assume this is something they can do because it's not Fortified like we've seen in the EU region, where Fortified means that debuff will actually make more absorb on people, which makes it a lot harder to deal with. But yeah, both of the teams are now available and are going to be engaging Ganker here. Complexity Limit caught up quite a lot now. They are engaging Ganker almost at the same time.
I mean, this is almost, I think it's a spitting image of what we saw in that Underrot, right?
Yeah.
They have more deaths on the board, but somehow, even though they've had these mistakes, they're pulling the bosses at the same time as One Last Chance. And from that Underrot, we also know that they just tend to have more consistent, better overall single target damage, so they should be able to sort of come back in the dungeon. But as I say that, once again, just another death on the board for Complexity Limit. Eric going down, that's going to be their second battle res and probably their last battle res for this dungeon that they're going to have available. So on every single one of these big pulls, Complexity Limit just kind of has had these issues where one of their players will go down, and it's not any one of the players, right? All of them are kind of taking turns making mistakes. So yeah, it's just kind of uncanny to see from a team that we expect clean runs out of. We've kind of worked them up along with both Ethical and Goosey Bad to be teams that could eventually compete with Method and A should they get more practice. But just so far today, they're not really playing to that standard that we expect of them. Yeah,
definitely not. They have to. Maybe it's also the fact that they maybe didn't practice too much on their first map because they thought, oh, it's the number 7 seed. We don't have to put too much practice into those dungeons. We can just focus on the later, like, upper bracket matches. That might also be a possibility. So, in the end, I hope it doesn't bite them because Underrot was very close. And this dungeon definitely looks incredibly close as well. So we'll see as this dungeon moves on. Complexity Limit now on 30%. So slightly behind to One Last Chance. But they're quite a bit ahead in trash. They are 5% ahead. And they have not played an obelisk on their side. So we'll see what they do later on. If they really have to do an obelisk later and One Last Chance does not, that would mean that One Last Chance is quite a bit ahead though.
And the important thing to mention as well, with all these deaths on the board, the biggest problem with Junkyard, especially in an MDI competitive setting, is that when you die, you lose all of the available bot buffs that you had, right? You have to now go find a new shock bot. You have to go find the new grease bot. You have to go find the new welding bot if you're running Twilight Dev as the tank. They have to now go find Eric another shock bot, and it looks like he's running off to a corner to go grab one, but that's just going to be travel time on the board for him as well. So at least they know where one is, where they can get one quickly here. Looks like I'm fired up as taking that welding bot right there as well for that little health increase. And somehow even with the death, they managed to kill off Gunker at roughly the exact same time. But you have to keep in mind the 25 seconds of deaths on the board is gonna be a factor when we get to the final boss here.
And the obelisk, unless they play 4, which not even Method and A did. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as well, as they now gather up a pretty significant pull on both sides. This should be a very similar pull, if not the exact same pull by both of the teams. Let's see how they pull this off. This can be very dangerous, especially because you have Raging, so all of these mobs do increase damage once they're low. And on top of that, you also have Skittish, which can cause some issues with aggro, because Complexity Limit does not actually have a Hunter or a Rogue to increase the aggro done by the tank.
That was an interesting way to do that pull. So when we saw Method and A do this earlier, Lighty was the one who pulled all 3 of those packs together. It looks like the way Complexity Limit does this pull, maybe for a safety thing, is they deal with the double pull down here, and you saw I'm Fired Up was actually off screen pulling the trash pack that's in front of the final boss's room, and it came in later. I wonder if they just don't want to deal with both cavalries at the same time while they're dealing with that massive AoE. I'm not quite sure what that is. It's definitely less efficient for overall AoE damage, but it's definitely a more safe play. One Last Chance now dealing with the second half of that trash pull, but looks like they're just once again a little bit slower than Complexity Limit at actually executing the pulls once they've gathered them up.
Yeah, and it looks like they were pulling the cavalries at the same time, meaning that the rapid fire lined up, and then the rapid fires were going in opposite direction, almost like sandwiching them there at the end. So that is something we've seen by Method and A as well, that they pulled one of the cavalries first, and then they delayed to pull on the second one a little bit, so it doesn't line up, so they don't have to dodge both at the same time. That might be something that Limit has to do in the future as well. Complexity Limit dealing with Samrak here, but One Last Chance dealing with it as well. This would have been their one chance here, or on One Last Chance to get the advantage on the last boss by only dealing with 3 obelisks, but now they're actually dealing with Samrak 2. Meaning that they're going to be completely even. In fact, Complexity Limit slightly ahead in dungeon speed, but 25 seconds difference in death timers means they're going to be incredibly even here in this last boss.
Yep. I mean, this is going to be, once again, this is literally Underrot all over again. With the difference, Complexity Limit is going to be pulling the boss a little bit sooner than One Last Chance will.
And they have one more obelisk
actually
to
pull
kill,
the boss
right?
here. Well, they're not. They didn't pull the boss right away, so the advantage they actually had of getting to the boss first, dealing with Samrak, is gone. They're pulling the boss at the exact same time. It's the same thing as Unbound Abomination. It's going to come down to it again. Can Complexity Limit pull this off twice in a series, where they're at the exact same progression in the dungeon, but they're just behind on death timers? I would be. That'd be a pretty ridiculous way to win a series here.
Yeah, they also don't have a Valorous available anymore, and everyone drops so incredibly low by the debuff the boss puts on. You see debuff on I'm Fired Up, it just does so much damage on Tyrannical, and then on top of that you just have all of these. Oh my god, they actually have so little space here because those shock bots are behind them. And then there was the middle area of denial, causing them to have very little space to dodge. But they did manage, and it looks like their Awaken mobs are down. So well done by them, as they're already in the intermission phase here. While One Last Chance, quite a bit behind, as you mentioned, just damage-wise, but they're saving their Bloodlust.
Major point. The Bloodlust, yes, yeah. The Bloodlust is a big deal. It's I mean, this is all going to come down to whether or not Complexity Limit can one-phase the aerial oppression unit without that Bloodlust. And the important thing to look out here is when we saw Method and A do this earlier, they saved one of their Army of the Deads here.
They don't have any.
Complexity Limit used both of theirs there.
Yeah, it looks like.
So they really have to come out with some insane single target damage here. Now, I'm assuming they have shock pots on all 5 of their members, but man, that's going to be a difficult single target damage check without the Bloodlust or the Army of the Deads. I'm not really sure they'll be able to pull it off. It's going to be it's going to be interesting to watch. Let's see if they can pull it off here.
Yeah, it looks like the overcharge station is about to be ready. We see everyone go down except Twisted, finishing off that channel, the hack. There we go. It's about to go into phase 2. Let's see if they have the damage without those offensive cooldowns available. We also don't have meta on Atrocity, so definitely just lacking a lot of single target cooldowns here for Complexity Limit. Now, even if they finish off the boss, 25 seconds in favor of One Last Chance. So even after the boss goes down, if they manage to one-phase it, which it does look like they do have enough damage, it might be close here at the very end. You see the cast below. It looks like it's incredibly close. They might not be able to do it.
25 seconds. They are going to finish it off
here.
Okay,
there we go.
You do have a little bit of time. The boss is 25. Dead, but 25 seconds on the board, and with the Bloodlust pop for One Last Chance, it's I mean, they definitely have enough time, right? They'll finish it off here. Looks like One Last Chance will be taking our second game here, able to take us to a game 3.
Damn.
Again, not in a dominating fashion. This is not what you want to see really from Complexity Limit at all, being the number 2 seed for the weekend, but hopefully they can make up for it in game 3 here.
One Last Chance taking the win, and at this point, they're staying in, close enough competition to be able to seal it. And on that one, Dranos, I think from the very beginning, Complexity Limit's just kind of looking shaken this tournament.
Yeah, it looks like One Last Chance is able to just kind of rely on Complexity Limit to make mistakes. And, the difference between... So this run ended up being somewhere between their 2 time trial times, right? 17 minutes, 46 seconds was One Last Chance's time there. So congratulations to them on improving their time trial time by more than 2 minutes. But Complexity Limit, fell from their time trial time by more than 3 minutes. And that was, a bigger part, I'd say, of this match going the way that it did. Stars are aligning nicely for One Last Chance here as we move on to our final map. And if they can replicate this success of having, clean or mostly clean runs, and if Complexity Limit continues to make mistakes, then One Last Chance could easily plot an upset here.
That's right. And, we were kind of saying it from the beginning as well, Nagura. Junkyard's just rife with traps, really. There's so many different ways to, get killed by the mobs, and this is one of the newer dungeons, of course, for 8.3 going into Mythic Plus. So, the familiarity between this dungeon versus something like a Taldazar is way different as well.
Definitely. I mean, the way how open the dungeon is, causing so many different ways of dealing with it, just means that each strategy is just hard to figure out on how you're going to do it. And especially if you have any sort of deaths and you have to pick up all of those bots again, like we've seen for Limit, having that full team wipe at the start. Now, thankfully, at the start, they probably didn't lose out on too many bots, because it was their very first pull, so they probably did not have lots of bots on their team. I assume they had a bunch of shock bots on their damage dealers, but they didn't have all 3 bots on everybody. So it didn't cost them too much time compared to if it would have been a full team wipe later on in the dungeon, but it still cost them quite a bit, of course. Now, One Last Chance, though, they only had 2 deaths throughout the whole run, and that's pretty impressive, to be honest. I mean, One Last Chance, the number 7 seed, coming into this tournament, just taking a game off Complexity Limit, which is the number 2 seed, that is just very impressive. And the fact that they are playing so cleanly as well. Of course, they have slower strategies overall, because they're the number 7 seed, and it's not to be expected from them, but the fact that they play so cleanly is still very impressive.
Well, I think that's the big thing, and, Dranos mentioned it as well. They shaved off a ton of time from time trials. They were continuing to practice and continuing to improve. And Dranos, let's start breaking down, how One Last Chance was staying in the fight and able to capitalize off of Limit's mistakes.
Yeah, so it really was that first pull where Complexity Limit lost those 3 minutes. That was where it went so wrong for them, because then they didn't have the cooldowns to be able to do it again. They had to break it up and do it a little bit more slowly when they got back there the second time. So that wipe was the huge opening that One Last Chance needed. Now, One Last Chance also had a couple of things go wrong for them. They had a death on the first boss, but that only cost them a battle res, right? Whereas Complexity used their battle res on that first pull and then continued to wipe anyways. And that ended up being way more costly. Max had to run around and try and get buffs in the middle of the map. For just like a minute, he was just mounted up, going around on a mission, picking up robots. And, that is a really slow and inefficient thing that gets forced to happen when you have the first pull go that wrong and when you lose your robots in that way. And as a result, they weren't able to make up the time difference, even with a more aggressive last boss strategy, and with most of their pulls being slightly faster than One Last Chance's.
Yeah, and now we're going to be going into our final game of this series to be King's Rest. And we've had some dungeons with Bolstering, we've had some dungeons with Explosive. Now we're having both, and we're going into a dungeon with pretty low trash density as well, Nagura, so... Is this the Hunter recipe?
I definitely think this is going to be a Hunter dungeon for sure.
Checkbox, checkbox, checkbox.
Now, it is Bolstering, which means they cannot just copy-paste their strategy that they had in previous cups. So I do hope both of these teams did practice this King's Rest, but I've actually looked at the map pool in the next couple of series, and King's Rest is not in a lot of the map pools, and if it's in the map pools, it's like on the 4th or 5th game, which means it would only be a number 3 game. So it's possible that some of the teams did not practice King's Rest too much, but I hope they did, because this is going to be very important, because it's the 3rd game, so this means this is going to be about going into the lower bracket or the upper bracket, so hopefully they did practice this one, because, yeah, Bolstering.
Yeah, Bolstering is quite tough as well, and I think this is also an area, Zyro, where it starts pushing a team to see how much depth that they have in terms of their strategies and how well prepared that they are.
Yeah, and also this is kind of one of those situations where it's a big mental exercise for both teams here, right? One last chance. When you're the 7th seed going up against the 2 seed in the first round, sometimes you don't really even give thought to the fact that you could potentially take the series here, right? The fact that they're in a game 3 against Complexity Limit here, they're going to have to dig deep to have a chance of taking this game 3 just in general, right? Because it's reset now. It's even. It's 1-1, one game to take the entire series. On the side of Complexity Limit, however, this is a big deal, right? You're the 2 seed for the first time coming to the tournament. You should have taken this series 2-0, but you've had so many mistakes leading to two sloppy maps. Are you able to, suck it up, get back into this game 3, play well, and then take the series that you probably should have taken 2-0? It's a big mental exercise for both of these teams here, so interested to see how they end up playing in this dungeon.
And go for it, Drados.
I think that this should be a good place for them, right? Like King's Rest, Mechagon Workshop, these are kind of places where Complexity Limit can't do anything too stupid. Right?
I was about to ask you that question. That's what I was angling towards.
There's
I was like the very first pull, and then
Machimba's room.
Just straightforward.
Yeah, Machimba's room has been something that's caused a little bit of trouble for some teams, but for the most part, and actually the bridge pull, if they decide to pull 3 packs at the start of the bridge after Machimba, we might be looking at a rough situation. But other than that, you're kind of just bounded by the dungeon, right? There's not an opportunity to pull an extra pack in and make it too dangerous, which that's a Complexity Limit, trademark move, right? It's just pull 3 extra packs in to pulls that nobody else does. And without that opportunity being available in this kind of dungeon, I think that they are pretty likely to be victorious because they can just let their higher damage and, better, better execution, kind of. I mean, their ability to execute the easy pulls pretty consistently, right? Because they're not going to be able to trick themselves into doing anything too hard.
I think this is also going to be a dungeon that's going to be pushing a lot more finesse from these teams to look at how well they can execute, like you mentioned, those smaller pulls. And when you have a whole barrel of hunters up your sleeve to be able to pull out, it's just going to be coming down to those specific moments to finesse. So we're waiting on getting all of our players ready to go before we dive into it, and this is going to be the deciding match to see who's going to be moving on and facing off against Ethical in the upper bracket. Game is ready to go as King's Rest between Complexity Limit, One Last Chance gets underway.
Alright, so here we go. We do see the triple hunter comp, to no surprise by both of these teams coming out. So we will see a lot of single target damage, and we see a lot of bolstering management here, which is going to be incredibly important. Even if it's not a very trash dense dungeon, it's still incredibly important to deal with bolstering right, because it's just going to cost you so much time if you don't deal with it properly.
Yeah, and already you can see the deal with explosives, right? When you pull these big packs together, you can have multiple of those explosives spawn. Fortunately, both teams' hunters are pretty good with dealing with explosives, so you should be able to deal with it, but keyword, of course, is should. We've seen a lot of issues with explosive in dungeons in the past, and it can get pretty ridiculous to deal with. I think what Dratnos was talking about before we started this dungeon is a pretty important thing for both teams, right? Bolstering explosive King's Rest, there's not much of a potential to do these big pulls that, can potentially run the dungeon. You can't do the major blob pull into Machimba because you can't bolster the boss. So a lot of the difficulty of the big pulls in the dungeon is gone for both teams. But already for Complexity Limit here, looks like I'm Fired Up has gone down, but I wonder if that was on purpose because they had to deal with the minions of Zul. Not really sure how Hunter's supposed to live through that, actually. Is there a way they can do it?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, looks like a planned death, maybe, from Complexity Limit there, but One Last Chance instead using their tank to do it, and he also goes down to the pole as well, which is actually going to result in 2 deaths for their team. Not a full team wipe, the Hunters are able to feign death off the aggro, but both the tank and the healer are going to have to run back and reset up this pole, and that could be a little bit of an issue for them here.
Yeah, it also looks like both of them actually use an Invis potion to get past the Guardians here at the very start, which is interesting because One Last Chance is running a full Night Elf, well, a double Night Elf comp and 3 Hunter comp.
Limit's dying.
Yeah, this is a full team wipe for Complexity Limit. Looks like some of the casts went out and they didn't have proper damage here as they pulled 3 packs on a bolstering environment.
And they had tons of mobs at 1% HP there as well, so already, right off the bat, I mean, bolstering, okay, we were talking about how the dungeon shouldn't be that difficult, and once again, casters don't actually know anything because both teams have had essentially full team wipes here. while their tank and healer were running back, 2 of the hunters ended up dying too. I'm not really sure what they would have ended up dying to, because they should have dropped aggro. Maybe they ran into the trash and just died so they could run back and deal with this guardian pack. Already, I don't know what's going on in this dungeon anymore.
Yeah, lots of issues for both teams. Maybe it's actually what... I mean, I did mention earlier that King's Rest is not in a lot of the map pools later on. And if it's in a map pool, it's at the very end, right? That means that the possibility of them having to play King's Rest is actually pretty low. And as you mentioned before, this is a number 2 seed versus number 7 seed map. And I assume One Last Chance didn't think they would go to a game 3, and maybe Complexity Limit didn't think so either. And maybe both teams didn't really practice this too well. We'll see as it goes further on into this dungeon, but right now, both teams are already struggling here with just the very beginning of the dungeon.
Yeah, not what you want to see. Now, the important thing to mention as well is Limit did commit their Bloodlust to that initial pull, so they don't have that available. Bloodlust now popped for One Last Chance on this pull. Looks like it's only a double pull for them, but Jet has gone down. He's going to have to release and run back. Of course, there's not going to be anything in between the release point and this, so it's just going to be about a 20-second run back for him. But they're going to have to deal with this trash pull with one less interrupt than they normally would. And in a group with 3 ranged interrupts with those hunters, there's going to be a lot of those Deathly Chill casts going through on the tank, so he's going to be taking a lot of damage, especially when there's 2 of those Witch Doctors in the group, and it looks like it's going to be a full team wipe for One Last Chances. They're not able to deal with that trash pack with 1 DPS down, so 5 more deaths on the board, and the Bloodlust gone for One Last Chance here. This first room is proving to be ridiculously dangerous for these 2 teams.
I mean, it's definitely dangerous mobs, right? It's not only Fortified, but it's also Bolstering. So at the very end of the pool, you have, and also different kinds of HP pools, right? You have the champion, which has much more HP than the warriors and the casters, the witch doctors. And you kind of want to focus the witch doctors because they constantly cast Deathly Chill on the tank and the Shadowbolt volley, which needs to be interrupted. And you don't have those melee interrupts to interrupt a lot of those casts. So this is why these pools can be incredibly dangerous on Fortified Bolstering combination. And this is why those teams struggle with this so much, especially when they pull multiple trash groups on top of each other. But it looks like both of the teams are just going slower now and pulling everything pack by pack because they're just running out of offensive and defensive cooldowns at this point.
Oh yeah, they're definitely low on them, which is why we're seeing them literally just pull at 1 pack at a time compared to what we're normally used to seeing, which is 3 or 4 packs pulled in the room with Bloodlust. So unfortunate to see this pull, but I think both teams at this point should be pretty well aware of what's going on with the other team. Remember, there's a 90-second stream delay based off of what's happening on live, so if the teams opt to have somebody watching this stream on their other monitor, they're completely allowed to do that. They're within their rights to do that, so they can see if the other team is having issues here and play accordingly. That being said, we're in the first boss room of the dungeon, and we're already 6 minutes into the dungeon, so there's plenty of time left in the dungeon for both of these teams to gain some sort of advantage in how they've dealt with trash. We see Complexity Limit now has dealt with all the trash. The Golden Serpent will be spawning here. One Last Chance still dealing with the second to last trash pack, and that's a big guy wailing on their tank there.
Definitely a big champion there. As Complexity Limit is engaging the Golden Serpent, it looked like Twisted might have pulled the Guardians from outside. We'll have to see if they arrive or not. We've seen the EU teams, I believe, play this dungeon with Bolstering already once, and we saw them actually pull the Guardians on top of the first boss. And then they were just cleaving off with the Hunters to get the damage increase on them, but they didn't actually finish off the Guardians until the Serpent was lower. But doesn't look like they pulled it after all. So just playing a little bit safer here. That means, though, they have to pull the Guardians later, right? Because I assume the Guardians are part of their route.
Yeah, I would assume that that normally is right. That's the typical strategy that we see from most teams: 2 Guardians into Golden Serpent, and then the final 2 pulled into the Gauntlet trash pack right afterwards. We did see One Last Chance opting to pull all 4 of the Guardians whenever they wiped and reset and came back and pulled, which is why they have that 6% trash advantage on the board. Complexity Limit only opted to pull 2 of them just so they could get back into the boss room without having to actually, finagle some way, like maybe a Hunter pull to the side with Feign Death or something like that. So they are going to end up pulling those 2 Guardians to the Gauntlet afterwards, so that is a potential, difference in difficulty of strategy between the 2 teams. But with Golden Serpent already down for Complexity Limit, I think it's safe to say that they have at least a slight advantage in the dungeon so far with how they've dealt with this first room.
Yeah, definitely. And now we see Complexity Limit actually dealing with the top left pack first. It always spawns top left first, and then it goes counterclockwise on the tournament realm. It's not RNG like it is on live servers. And you see Twisted is not actually with the group. You see that he's out of range, meaning he will very likely pull those Guardians on top of this gauntlet like Cyro mentioned. This is actually very important here, because the Guardians need to arrive after this pack is dead, because if they arrive too early, they will actually get bolstered by this pack. So we'll see when Twisted arrives. They're probably communicating right now and telling Twisted how low the mobs are and when he can actually come in with them, so they don't bolster, because if they bolster, that's gonna be a reset for them.
Right, and it's easy. It's sort of an easy thing to well, I wouldn't say it's easy because they have to deal with this trash pack without their healer, but they can sort of kite those Guardians around the Golden Serpent Room just a little bit, and they also move pretty slowly because they like to cast that Suppression Slam. So yeah, we see them coming in right now, right after the trash pack is dead. Good timing from them on that as well. They'll be able to cleave that down with this Guard Captain pack whenever it spawns. You know, a little bit of 5 AoE cleave for the Hunters, which is pretty efficient for them, and it shouldn't be too major of an issue. This is a pretty dangerous trash pack on Fortified, but I don't think we've seen any deaths in this gauntlet the entire 6 weeks, so I don't expect to see any more here. It's going to be all about that explosive management, making sure they're not getting too many bolstering stacks off, and Hunters are pretty good at doing even cleaves, so bolstering shouldn't be too major of an issue for just a five pack like this.
Yeah, it looks like the lightning AoE is going out and it's not being interrupted. Looks like the Ring of Peace was not ready by Twisted to knock it away, but they still managed to just kite everything off of it and still have pretty even damage. Again, a little bit of a problem here with bolstering is that lots of these mobs here have different kinds of HP pools, especially the very first pack that they dealt with. The King has a lot more HP than the other minions around it, so that is why that's also a big reason why we have the Hunter comms, because Hunters are so good at priority target damage, and they're very good to deal with bolstering. So bolstering management is going to be incredibly difficult throughout the whole dungeon here, especially in the Machimba room when we have all of those fluids as well.
For sure, and you can see the difference in time here. Even though they had to deal with the Guardians, there's still one full section of the gauntlet ahead of One Last Chance, now dealing with a third section for Complexity Limit, second one just now starting to spawn for One Last Chance. So not quite the 1 minute and 20-second difference on Boss 1 that we see on the timer at the bottom. Probably closer to like 1 minute flat, I would say, between the two teams. But you know, 1 minute in a long dungeon like King's Rest, there's still plenty of time to make up for that mistake. So really, we need to see a completely clean run out of Complexity Limit over the course of the rest of this dungeon. Really, just honestly, for a mental boost as well, just knowing that you can play clean for the second half of King's Rest, which is not easy, will help a lot over the course of the weekend for them.
Yeah, definitely. I did want to mention one thing that I just noted, that Max is actually playing Dwarf compared to Jarvis playing Night Elf. Means that Complexity Limit can't actually do any sort of Shadow Melt / Feign Death skips because of that Dwarf on Max. We've seen Dwarf a lot in King's Rest, especially when it was Necrotic. We don't have Necrotic this time around, so I think Jarvis is going to be fine to run the Shadow Melt. I think it's more of a safety thing to have the Dwarf racial available, just because of all of the bleed effects that are in King's Rest on trash and on bosses as well. So having the Dwarf racial definitely a safety thing that makes it a little bit easier to deal with all of those trash mechanics.
And on top of that, there aren't too many Shadow Meld skips that you need to use in this dungeon, right? The major skip that we see come from most teams is the skip to the council boss, and we normally see a hunter camouflage through with like a speed lightfoot potion, and then they'll pull the boss while everyone else is in the realm, and then they'll get pulled out when the boss is in boss combat. So they don't really need to have Shadow Meld on every single one of their players, and you can see every single hunter also running Dwarf as well, just because they have Feign Death available in any situation too. So yeah, it makes sense to run the Dwarf racial here as well. Those bleeds from the Berserkers can just completely destroy a tank. Limit now, pulling the Beckoner of Chaos. They're going to be skipping this Purification Guardian on the bridge with that, it looks like, and then we'll see how they plan on dealing with Machimba's room, how they plan on separating out these blobs here.
I think the fact that Complexity Limit is actually dealing with Samurai here is also an indicator that they might have not practiced this dungeon too much, because we've seen teams pull 4 obelisks with the last boss almost all the time, especially with the triple hunter comp, because you have all the hunter utility to taunt off the tank buster, you have all of those dwarf racials to get rid of the debuff, you have the turtles, so it definitely is something we've seen a lot. Now let's see how they deal with the Machimba room, as they pull a lot of fluids here, lots of explosive spawning as well. Not only do they have to deal with bolstering, but they also have to deal with explosive at the same time.
Yep, they really need to make sure they're single targeting this Guardian down, because that bolstering could come way out of hand. And it's kind of funny watching these hunters just all run in circles because they have to dodge those green swirlies, because if you get hit by one of those, that debuff starts stacking up. You start seeing hunters dying quickly with that. And of course, it only goes on range players, so all of them are just kiting in circles around. It's kind of funny to watch. Guardian going down first, perfect execution there, and then they just have to worry about cleaving down the blobs afterwards. And without any sort of bursting to worry about, pretty clean. Now they have to replicate that on the other side of the room too.
Yep, so they definitely do need to do another pull. There's no way they can pull Machimba on top of this, of course, because of bolstering, so no way of speeding this up. We see One Last Chance also dealing with Samrak, and they're pulling the Purification Construct on the bridge, which is definitely interesting. Looks like they want to pull it on top of some of the fluids and another construct, which is something we've seen before. We've seen teams deal with this and then skip a little bit of trash later on. It does give quite a bit of percentage here, this bridge construct. It gives quite a lot, but it seems like they're completely soloing it, which definitely is not a very quick strategy, dealing with one construct by itself. Let's hope they can actually make up quite a lot of time later on by skipping trash, because yeah, this is definitely not efficient at all.
Yeah, not in the slightest. Like usually, what we saw this a lot in the European region last weekend, where they ended up pulling that Purification Construct with Machimba. Obviously, that's not possible here with Bolstering unless you just leave the Purification Construct alive for the entire boss fight, which is also not really ideal. But we got to keep an eye on One Last Chance here, as they have pulled all of the embalming fluids in this section of the dungeon, opting to go for a different strategy from Complexity Limit, where Complexity Limit pulled half and half. They're going for the fluids first, and then they'll do the constructs afterwards. But this is incredibly dangerous. With this many mobs on the Bolstering affix, if any Bolstering gets out of hand, those fluids are going to be alive for a lot longer than they should be. So got to keep an eye on here. Everything needs to die almost exactly evenly for them.
Yeah, and now we see Complexity Limit using that strategy where they click all of the tomes at the same time to make the boss stop casting any more abilities for the remainder of the fight. Meaning there will be no more drain fluid and no more fire spots on the ground anymore. This means so that the tank is going to take a lot of damage because there's no breathing room anymore. Machimba will just constantly auto-attack max, and Machimba does a lot of damage, so want to keep an eye out for that. It is fortified, so definitely a little bit easier for them to deal with this. But yeah, that's why you see those ads actually being CC'd on the corner of the room, because they did open those coffins immediately as soon as somebody got entombed.
And of course the trade-off, like you mentioned here, is that even though he doesn't cast the drain fluids, doesn't cast the burning corruption anymore, Machimba himself does a lot of melee damage, so you really have to pump those heals into your tank here, because he's going to be getting absolutely smashed by this boss, you know, if he doesn't actually block the melees as well. But yeah, there's a lot of potential tank damage here, especially, and the trade-off as well. If one of those void touched mummies gets uncc'd, they do a lot of damage to your tank too. But Complexity Limit able to pull it off clean. Moving on to this trash gauntlet after Machimba here. One Last Chance still dealing with those two internment constructs at the same time. I'm not really sure what the better strategy here is on Bolstering, whether it's better to go with what Complexity Limit did, like the half and half concept, or whether it's better to go for what One Last Chance did. I think the potential for Bolstering to go wrong is higher on One Last Chance, but I think the potential speed could be faster.
I'm not really sure. I think this is definitely... I think it's going to be very, very close between those two strategies for sure. But Complexity Limit now dealing with a pretty difficult pack. It's only 3 buffs, but it's still very dangerous just because you have those 2 casters, the Hex Priest, which constantly cast Spectral Bolt on the tank, huge amounts of magic damage. On top of that, you have the Berserker, which leaves the bleeds behind. So definitely well done by Complexity Limit, and now they're gathering up for a little bit of a bigger pull with the Raptors and the Beastmaster here. So we'll see how they deal with that one. I think they're just going to skip the Brute because it's Bolstering, so it seems to be very inefficient to deal with that one.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. It's not the most efficient thing in the world, but if they're able to evenly cleave it through, it might be fine. But with this kiting they're having to do, it's going to take them a long time to actually finish this pull off. So not sure. I don't know. Not the greatest pull here from Complexity Limit. Having to kite it out like this is not ideal. Now, of course,
I think they had to because the Brute was coming, right?
Yeah, the Brute. Yeah. You're right. The Brute was coming. They had to kite it out too. But also, one of the things we see a lot of teams do in this particular trash pull in order to make it easier to stack up and cleave is their tank will actually line of sight around the corner on either the right or the left side, and that helped a lot with the actual stack up. And then at that point, you can binding shot to stop the leaps as well. There's a lot you can do a little better here. So just tiny little, changes they can make to these polls could definitely give them an extra 15, 20 seconds on the board. But one last chance, still trucking through. Machimba going down for them as well, and they'll be right behind them, hot on the heels of Complexity Limit here. They're kind of keeping that 1 minute 30 or so gap in check here. And we're seeing this skip that we mentioned earlier, Complexity Limit, going for it right now.
Yeah, so what they're doing here is just entering the obelisk, but they don't actually want to deal with the Awaken mob that spawns here. They just want to use this as a skip. This is why you see Eric is not actually inside the realm. He is outside using his camouflage, just walking past the bridge, then using Feign Death to de-aggro any of the mobs that he might have pulled, and then just engaging Kula. And as soon as you get in boss combat, your whole group will be pulled out of the Awaken realm, but the Awaken mob will not get pulled out. And therefore, this is a very interesting skip. I believe Method and A was the first team to actually show this, and a lot of teams adapted to this strategy.
Yep, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's kind of crazy how quickly teams adapt to strategies, right? You see it shown off one weekend, like maybe on a Saturday, and sometimes the best teams have already picked it up by Sunday,
yeah.
And then they'll be able to pull it off then. And of course, 1 weekend later, forget about it. Every top team has already pulled it off. So interesting to see those distinctions made, especially in strategies in King's Rest, where I think the first week we saw like 3 or 4 different strategies used. I think we saw both Awaken Mobulisks being pulled there several times by a couple teams, and then we saw this skip coming out as well once people realized that 3 or 4 Obelisk was possible on King Gazar. But now Complexity Limit is on Xanazal the Wise, the second boss of the council. But one last chance. Already problems in this first trash pull that we also saw Complexity Limit having issues with. Both their healer and one of their hunters going down here. It looks like they might be able to finish off this trash pull, but 10 seconds on the board in terms of death timers for them. And also the tank going down here. They might be able, they just might be able to pull this off with a pet taunt and then a battle res coming out of one of the hunters. But they're resing their healer.
They have to. They don't have an out of comp. They have to rest their healer,
True,
right?
Yeah. Okay, they were able to finish the pull off though.
All right, so they did manage. Yeah, but this looked like the very bad bolstering management there. The Raptor and the Berserker were very highly bolstered. Then Rhydon got one shot by the Raptor jumping on him, and he got hit by the cleave. So just died there straight up. And then without the healer, Jairus had a bleed on him from the Berserker, which was also bolstered, and it was just too much damage for Jairus to survive. So yeah, just lots of problems for them. Did manage to, thankfully. Oh, Rhydon going down.
Rhydon. That's bad. Everyone's in the realm. They can't leave the realm.
Yeah, this is they can't rest him. He needs to release. They might be able to do this because it's only Void Weaver. Void Weaver definitely not a very dangerous mob. Doesn't need any healing, right? As long as you interrupt. But still going to cost him a lot of time until he's back.
Yep, he's just going to have to run back through the entire dungeon, and that's going to take a while, right? They did unlock the checkpoint. They killed the Purification Construct, though. So they have that checkpoint available. It's not going to be like the ridiculous full 2-minute run back, but it's still going to be probably a minute or so of a run back for them. So more time on the board for one last chance, but Complexity Limit is now dealing with the final boss of King's Rest. Kali is going down, and with that, they only have one more trash pull, the Shadow of Zul, then of course that triple awakened final boss that they have left to deal with. And we were mentioning it in that gauntlet. Are they going to be able to have a clean run for the rest of the dungeon? So far, so good for them. They've come back from those early mistakes, and they're playing a lot better so far.
Definitely. I mean, we've seen no more mistakes by Limit after this initial wipe that they had in this first boss room. So well recovered by them, which is also something that we don't see from all of the teams. Sometimes we see a team make a mistake at the very start and then just not recover from it and just keep on making a mistake throughout the rest of the dungeon. But Limit definitely did recover properly. We also see Max use his Dwarf Racial here to get rid of 3 bleed stacks by the Berserkers. Now no more Racial available, so he should be using the Hunter Pets here to get some of the bleeds on the Hunter Pets instead of him, so it doesn't stack up too high, because again, it's fortified, so those bleeds actually take for quite a lot of damage. Rhydon going down again. Where
did Rhydon die at?
I'm not sure.
Where did he die? He released, so he must have died on the run back somewhere.
He needs to release again here. This is such a huge time loss for them. They'll just have to wait.
I hope we can get like a POV of what happened there, because I have no earthly idea what could have happened to Rhydon. Because you can just take the obelisk and run to the boss, right? There's no way you should die. There's nothing to die to if you take the obelisk. Did he maybe try to invis pot through the trash and just not make it or something?
Yeah,
that's really weird.
Yeah, he should have taken the portal on the bridge, right? Because he took the shortcut, because they did kill the construct, so he can use the shortcut. He died again, I think.
He just died again.
I'm not sure. Yeah, because he can take the shortcut. No, they don't have the Guardians up anymore either. They don't have the minions of Zul, so he takes shortcut. There's no Purification Construct. then he enters the portal, because they did finish off that obelisk, right? The one on the bridge. So you could just take the portal and walk up. I'm not really sure what is causing any of these issues here. This seems really weird on their sides.
Oh, they unlocked the second checkpoint.
Oh, okay.
By dealing... Okay, that's what happened. That makes a lot more sense.
Yes.
So Shaurus is going to go pull the trash so that he can actually make through. He's going to Shadow Meld the aggro off.
No,
he was going to try to Shadow Meld it off, but he just dies to an errant Spectral Bolt.
Yep.
This is really unfortunate for them. They unlocked that second checkpoint by pulling the council boss so that when he died the first time, he wasn't able to actually make it back to the group. This is really unfortunate for them. Wow.
Yeah, at this point he should have just maybe ran back, but yeah, that's just a long way, right? If you have to walk from the entrance all the way here, that's just such a long walk. They did manage to get up the engineering battle rest now, so they have the double freezing trap here in the Berserkers, and one of the hunters did go in combat with them. That means Ryan could... No, he pulled something again. Yeah, he needs to release. Oh, this is just
what can you do at this point?
He needs to just walk back all the way, normally, without using the shortcut.
There's maybe one thing you can do. You can have Shaurus go right before you.
No, he could just walk
land right
back.
Before you. Well, they could also run all the way back. That wouldn't be as cool, right?
True.
I mean, let's be honest. At this point, with 18 deaths on the board and they haven't even dealt with the third boss, we're just going to have to keep an eye on complexity limit as they gear up for this final pull here on King Dazar. With, I believe, yep, you can see it right over there over the trash percentage. 3 obelisks on the board. They did deal with the Beckoner of Chaos, so no Fear Circle is going to be coming out for them. None of that shenanigans that we saw from Method EU last weekend where you get feared right before you disengage and die to a Goomba Stomp from King Dazar. Not going to happen to complexity limit here, because that guy isn't available. But still, 3 obelisks with King Dazar is nothing to scoff at with the Bloodlust popped for them here.
Yep, so let's see how they deal with this one. As we see Max just leaping away, we see the Hunter pets just taunting the Tank Buster, making sure the Spirit Breaker does not go onto Max. And now we see the Dark Fear come out. Max is just going to mitigate that damage, and the Hunters, of course, can just go out of it without losing any sort of damage. And we'll see some of the Void Weaver casts might actually go through, because we have a triple ranged interrupt here on the Hunters, meaning you can't actually interrupt all of the casts. But you can just let some of the casts go through. If it's on the tank, for example, you can use Spell Reflect, or they can use some sort of immunity on the Hunters to just let some of the casts go through, making sure they interrupt the important casts that are on people that do not have defensives available, like maybe if a cast goes on Twisted. But it looks like they're interrupting really well so far, and they're also just kiting the Blood. The Blood is probably the least amount of problem here on this pool, just because this room is really big, and the pools on the floor really should not be as big of an issue as it is in maybe other boss fights.
Yep, for sure. There's just so much room to kite around here. They have the whole 360 degrees of the room to kite as well, so they shouldn't have any issues with that. And with the Blood of the Corruptor going down, the only thing left to deal with is, of course, Reban and Tazala on top of King Dazar. But it shouldn't be too much of an issue compared to the Awakened mobs for complexity limit, as they have the triple hunter for the single target comp here. Tazala now spawned. They'll go ahead and cleave that down. Looks like all of them have their... Oh, Eric doesn't have the turtle available, but 2 turtles available for this first Deathly Roar, so they won't get feared. And yeah, should be easy goings for complexity limit. And like we mentioned earlier on, like, after playing those first 2 maps so sloppily, not what you want to do coming into your third cup where you played the best in time trials you ever have, to start off a series like that isn't going to help your mental at all, right? You're going to be upset about it. You're going to be annoyed about it. But able to bring it back in the second half of this King's Rest, play a clean dungeon after those early mistakes, it's a good way to end a series off like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important for them to win this one too, because if they would have lost this first series, I mean, they wouldn't have been out, but all of a sudden they would have been in a lower bracket, which means there's different map pools, probably nothing they would have expected, right? I'm very certain they practice for their upper bracket map pools, and not for the lower map pools. So all of a sudden being in a different kind of environment and having to play different dungeons definitely would have caused some issues. So well done for Complexity Limit to actually come back here and finish off this last King's Rest here fairly cleanly. Of course, they did have the mistake at the very first boss room, but did manage to recover properly. And yeah, one last chance. Well done up until this last unfortunate mistake here. But yeah, still really good performance by them, winning a game against Complexity Limit, the number 2 seed.
And congrats to Complexity Limit, although I think the biggest takeaway that I have onto this one, Dratnos, is that lower seeded teams shouldn't always be practicing just